What up, YouTube? It's 11:10 right now. I'm across the street from the Greyhound station in Montreal, Canada, and it's November 8th. Once again, I'm about to do my chapter blog about this chapter called The Apostasy of Al-Aswad-Al-Ansi and those of Yemen. The chapter basically starts off talking about a guy named Ja'ir ibn Abdallah al-Bajali. He was sent to Yemen to Al-Ansi by Muhammad to attempt to get him to convert to Islam. This occurred in 632, by the way, the later years of Muhammad. So Al-Aswad-Al-Ansi had turned down that offer from Ja'ir ibn Abdallah al-Bajali. So much later on, Muhammad sent two more guys. One, his name was Qais ibn Hubayra, and another guy's name was Farah ibn Musa. And, you know, of course, like, they were a two-man delegation, but they had like some tribes and clans with them. People from Central and Southern Arabia that the book refers to as Mathij. Now, to me, that ain't nothing but like a regional classification, because like Najran, for instance, which is in southwestern Arabia, is also a part of this classification. So when I think about it, I'm looking at it as the same as northern Arabian tribes that are also considered Ghatafin, you know, or like all across the board. You got Ghatafin, then you got it was another one, like the Banu Kabi people that I talked about earlier. Again, to me, in my mind, these ain't nothing but classifications. But these two guys, this two-man delegation was sent to attempt to get the people of Al-Abna to convert to Islam. Now, before I go on, based on the chapter itself, Al-Aswad-Al-Ansi was also in control of those people, even though they were sort of autonomous as far as their ethnicity is concerned, collectively speaking, because they're pretty much descendants of Persians from northern Iran. Now, I'm gonna go ahead and go into the background of these people, because I found it to be interesting, because it kind of like it, when I read about them and then I put them in my jargon, it took me back to the early Ethiopians, like in the chapter concerning how Christianity got spread into Najran. Even though it wasn't about that, but I kind of like made it about that in addition to the chapter itself. And I had learned a lot about it. So as far as like the history of the Dalamites, which is also what the Al-Abna people are referred to as, it kind of like parallels to the history. So it's like additional information that I came across. So I'm gonna go ahead and go into the background. Basically, like I say, they were a part of the Persian, the Sassanid Empire. Again, the Sassanid Empire lasted from the 4th to the 7th century. Now, when they first made it to Yemen, it was around, I want to say 570 AD. Okay, so this basically concerns kind of like the history of this battle called the Battle of the Elephant. I'm trying to think how I'm gonna start this. Basically, okay, you had a Himyarite king, because okay, in the chapter about Najran, when I was talking about them, I mentioned how in 525 AD, you know, one of the earliest Christian genocides is well documented had occurred. During that time, it was a Himyarite king. His name was Yusuf ibn Tamir. He was the guy that had initiated this whole genocide. For whatever reason, he started attacking Christians. Also, some polytheists as well, but also people within, or who could also be classified under the Himyarite people also. So he went to a place called Zafar, as I mentioned already earlier before, that was one of the places that 3 Christian or Ethiopian Christian churches were built at. But he also went as far as Najran, and he was slaughtering people, etc. That's when the Ethiopians, or actually the Aksumites, had got involved. Now, the reason why this part is important before I go along with this, I don't want to say just additional, but before I go along and explaining the history of the Al-Abna people there, the reason why it's important is because 525, when Yusuf ibn Tamir got killed, And by the way, one of the leaders of the Najran people there, a chief, his name was Al-Harith, as I mentioned already. And today there's a holiday attributed to him. He's referred to by the Catholic Church today as Saint Aretha. So let me put that out there again. But anyway, after this whole little battle occurred or whatnot and the Christians won, I didn't know the name of the Nagas king at the time, because like I say, this was kind of like brush over information. Now I know his name. His name back then was Calab, and he basically reigned from 510 to 540, so it coincides with that time period. Now, whatever that occurred, he had like one general. Some people say two, but the guy that had went to Yemen, or was like a governor of the places of Yemen as well as southwestern Arabia, his name was Abraham ibn Ashram. All right, he was one of the Ethiopian generals. For whatever reason, he decided to depart from the Aksumite kingdom and establish himself as a head there in Arabia. I don't know exactly why. Like, that's something that I read later into when I break down the book called Tariq al-Tabari. That's like in the far future. It doesn't really have too much relevance with this, so I keep it on the face as far as this aspect of this blog. Anyway, so he became a king there in southwestern Arabia as well as Yemen, even though he ruled from, I think, Marib as well as Sanaya. But he had ended up dying, some say between 555 and 565, but definitely by 570 he was dead. And then he had a son by the name of Mashruk ibn Abraham. All right, he had came into power during that same year. Now the Himyarites that still lived in the region had an issue with him. Some type of conflict occurred to where the Himyarite king at that time, his name was Saif ibn Yazan. He had went north or made contact with the Sassanid king at the time by the name of Khosrow. Khosrow ruled from 533 to 579, even though he was born in 501 AD. So he made contact with him supposedly through Al-Hira, which is also in southern Iraq, through some princesses there. Long story short, he offered him a deal. He said, if you help us defeat this Ethiopian, then you can have the lands here, and pretty much offered himself and his people and his state to be subjugated under the Sassanids. So Khosrow agreed. So there was a general by the name of, what was his name? I think Walriz. That was his name. Walriz. General Walriz. So Khosrow sent him and the army to go south in order to fight against the Abyssinians at the time, because the Ethiopians, like after Abraham ibn Ashram separated from the Aksumites, from that point they are known historically speaking as the Abyssinians. So when he sent that guy to fight against him, I'm not sure if it was, I don't think it was only 800 of them together, but at least there was a brigade of 800 men that was included in Walriz's army. All right, because the Abyssinians, if they were powerful, then they had to have as far as like the Himyarites and the Sassanids, they had to have had more than 800 people, but at least 800 men, which is like a special brigade, went with General Walriz to fight against the Abyssinians. Now the thing is, these men come from northern Iran. All right, a place called Dalim. It's important, and I'm gonna explain why in a second. Again, I talk like I'm talking to an audience, but this is strictly for retention purposes and personal reasons because I'm interested in this. They come from a place called Dalim, which is also within the Alborz Mountains in northern Iran, supposedly, or it stretches from Azerbaijan, which is basically at the southwestern corner of the Caspian Sea, all the way into Khorasan, the Khorasan province, which is in northeastern Iran, bordering Central Asia. In other words, Turkmenistan and all of that, because I looked it up recently just to make sure. But that's where Dalim was at. The fighting brigade of 800 men come from them. Now they also trace their history back even further beyond the Sassanid Empire to, what some people call the Great Aryans, which I thought was interesting. I kept a note of it. I'm not going to go further into it. But to make a long story short, those people pretty much are the descendants or the ancestors of the Al-Abna people in Yemen. But I'm going to go ahead and go further with this part anyway, because I got time. So they went south and it basically fought against the Abyssinians. The Abyssinians ended up losing, and they also lost Sinai. So the Himyarites regained Sinai. Now, I think a part of the reason for this whole conflict was the Abyssinians also attempted to attack in Mecca and destroy the Kaaba at that time. All right, the Kaaba had no monotheistic significance as far as my understanding. It was polytheists that worshipped at the Kaaba, even though it was always put, I don't want to say colored, but when people put like robes and stuff like that over it, it was always a black color. But that whole battle with the elephant, as far as them trying to raid the Kaaba, if I want to say there's some type of monotheistic significance to it, then it would be from the side of the Christians of Abyssinia. So anyway, I think that was one of the reasons for this whole battle. But anyway, Mashruq got defeated. He had died on the battlefield. All right, so the Sassanids gained Sinai and also made it a vassal state under them. Now later on, I believe, later on, Saif ibn Yazan had ended up being killed by an Abyssinian or an Ethiopian. So General Waris had to come back south again and bring 4,000 men with him in order to defeat the Ethiopians, in which he eventually did. Once he did that, Saif ibn Yazan's son by the name of Mahdi Karib, that's when they established him on the throne as the king of the Himyarites. So that's how that little history go. But as far as the Persians, the Abna people, that's their story as far as how they made it into Yemen during that time period. That's the history of them. So going back forward, and I feel like I'm forgetting something. Hopefully I'm not. Let me see. Oh yeah, one thing I want to add is that during this time period, or that time period in 570, because I looked up the chronological list of Aksumite kings, even though the Abyssinians were autonomous to them during this time period, the Aksumite king at the time was a guy named Constantinos. I believe that was his name. At least sound like a Latin word. At least a Spanish name for him, or a Latin name for him. I'm pretty sure he had others. I think another name for him may be Lowell. We shall see in the future. But he was the king at that time. So going back to this time period in 632. Now, Qais ibn Hubayra and Farah ibn Musa, Muhammad had sent them to attempt to get the people of Al-Abna to convert to Islam. Now, to me, that was pretty strategic because, like I say, Al-Aswad-Al-Ansi was in control over those people, and they felt like they were going through tyranny as well, because based on the chapter and what's written about them, they were also forced to do things against their will. In fact, I go further and say that there was a degree of emasculation involved as well, because the king at the time was a guy named Abawiz. I believe that was his name, Abawiz, and his wife was named Marzubana. Now, Al-Ansi ended up marrying her, all right? And even though she becomes, well, I'm going to say like this, a hint to me that she wasn't, it was kind of against her volition, is the fact that she was involved in his death later on. But anyway, he ended up marrying her. So they were also subjugated under him. Now, the chapter do refer to him as a false prophet also, even though I'm not sure if he was really Islamic at all. I think he was more so like of a Judaic influence as far as belief is concerned. But he was referred to as a false prophet. Now, the following that he had, you know, they're called the Ansi people, or the Ansi tribe, after his last name. So, I want to point out, well, I guess I'm just going to keep going. So, these two men had went there. Again, based on the chapter itself, Muhammad was still alive. Just like all the other chapters prior to this, you're always going to get different hadith. So, you know, it might be variations within this particular hadith as opposed to another one. But some do say that Muhammad may have died by the time he got there, by the time those two men got there, and then others say that he died after the fact. But I believe that he more than likely did die by the time those two men